Can you hear me? No, you can hear me? Can you hear me now? Good afternoon. It is very important for us to have this panel to talk about something as important as the relationship with science and the relationship with the original peoples and the conservation of Amazon. I believe that we have simultaneous interpretation, so I'm going to do the mediation in Portuguese. You can ask the questions in English. I believe we have simultaneous interpretation. We are now entering the bio age, replacing the industrial age. We don't know yet how this bio age is going to develop, but it all shows that the growing importance of the natural resources. Within this context, we have the importance between the science and the original peoples. We are moving closer to the tipping point, as Professor Carlos is going to show us. So I would like to give you a brief presentation of the panelists. I would like to introduce you to Emma. Emma has a long experience in the United Nations with responsibilities involving management, especially in the field of the importance of biodiversity in the world context, but very focused on the Latin America. And more recently, she has an involvement in the scientific panel. Emma is an economist, graduated at the University of Universidad Complutense from Madrid, Spain. She has a diploma in language and French civilization from Sorbonne, Paris. So, Emma, thank you very much for being here. Thank you, Roberto.
I'm going to give some work. Can you hear me? Perfect. Can you hear me? Não? Agora? Então tá, ótimo. I think I want to make some work for the interpreters, and I'm going to be the one that speaks in English. But I wanted to first, on behalf of the Sustainable Development Network Solutions, which I am Vice President for the Americans and for the Science Panel of the Amazon, to welcome to this panel. This panel will be very proud of the Science Panel of the Amazon that is composed of over 240 scientists that have been working for the first time in an assessment, a scientific assessment of the state of the Amazon basin. We are very proud and we're very grateful to all those scientists that have committed their knowledge and their time to produce what is now known by the press like the Encyclopedia of the Amazon. The panel is composed of primarily scientists from the region, but has a number of global partners that have contributed to it. And currently they're working on a special policy briefs for policy relevance for decision makers. And you will hear from them about three important ones: on restoration, on indigenous territories, and how they're addressing climate change, as well as on the tipping point that, as you know, we have the privilege to have Professor Nobre as one of the chairs and one of the godfathers of the tipping points knowledge. The panel will continue working, and we also are very grateful because we have received support initially from the Moore Foundation and the Mott Foundation, and the Moore Foundation has committed to continue to supporting the work of the panel, as well as the Global Environment Facility. And this is very important because we would like to have the panel institutionalized in the region to contribute to decision-making in such an important basin. The panel is also inspiring others, and we are currently in the process of developing a panel for the Congo. And my colleagues are also working on developing a panel for Indonesia. So we'll have a lot of speaking scientists in this fantastic forest that the world still has. So I'm very grateful to our hosts, the Consortium of Governors, to have hosted us for this event. And we will continue in dialogue with them as well, because our scientists, many come from the states of Amazonia Legal, and we would like to contribute both in the decision-making at the regional level, at the federal level, but also at the level of the states. Well, I thank you very much, without much ado, Roberto, and thank you, our moderator, for being so gracious to help us in this task. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Nós já vamos passar imediatamente para o professor Carlos, mas acho que é importante ressaltar esses três pilares.
We're going to pass directly to Professor Carlos, but it's very important to restate, since we have to approximate these three topics, the climate agenda to the original peoples, and I'm going to pass the floor to Professor Carlos, and Carlos is going to talk a little bit about these topics. As Roberto said, we're going to talk a lot about the search for solutions, but I would like to introduce this topic by mentioning how important it is to search for solutions for the indigenous territories and the need to restore the forest. I'm going to start by mentioning the tipping points in English. And can you please stand up so we can see the slides? Amazon, for millions and millions of years, it has maintained the climate balance and the biodiversity of the planet. Just for you to have an idea, 16% of the productivity of the global planet, of the global terrestrial productivity, has been maintained by the Amazon. It stores 150 to 200 billion tons of carbon. Up to 50% of the water is recycled by the forest, and it is very important in terms of the natural restoration that the forest has kept throughout the years. In the last 50 years, that's what we have seen in the forest, a huge degradation. The whole Amazon is 1 degree hotter and drier. The dry season has one of the most shocking, the most shocking data in the world. The dry season is 50 weeks longer in the last 40 years. It is equivalent to the temperature has raised 2 to 3 degrees over the last 4 decades. Over 1 million square kilometers were degraded, and over 1 million square kilometers were burned.
E também representam grandes emissões de gás carbônico. Estão aqui com a Alencar, que é uma grande especialista nesse
And
assunto.
it's representing great emissions of carbon gas. We have an expert here in the panel. She's going to talk about indigenous land, but she has several studies on the fire in the Amazon. So what are we seeing? The forest for millions of years has been maintained, but now it's being degraded. We have the increase of tree mortality. The trees that are resistant to the dry seasons, they have not increased. And unfortunately, all the Amazon is becoming, all the Amazon, unfortunately, is becoming a carbon source with the emissions of deforestation and fire and emissions, and diminishing the photosynthetic capacity, increasing the flammability of the forest, and also we are diminishing the biodiversity in the Amazon. And here we are able to see the potential tipping points in the Amazon forest. Next slide. So we see the planet temperature that has increased 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels in the Amazon. The rain is between 2,000 to 2,300 millimeters average. It shouldn't be less than 1,800, and 17 of Amazon forest loss. We cannot go over 20%. The dry season lasted from 3 to 4 months, and now it's from 4 to 5. And if it's over 6, there's no return, and the dry season is much drier now. Therefore, we can say that we surpass the tipping point, we can lose up to 40% and more than 50% in the end of the century. So this is a great risk. We cannot go beyond the tipping point. Next slide, please. If we reach the tipping point, we're going to have a huge loss on indigenous peoples, traditional communities, and we are going to lose more than 50% of species. And an increase of 0.2 degrees Celsius would mean losing 275 gigaton, preventing us to reach the Paris Agreement goals. Only losing the Amazon is this total. And of course, we have a very dangerous crime in the Amazon, increasing the vulnerability in all the populations in the Amazon. Next slide. So what do we need to do? How to prevent a tipping point? These are the conclusions of the panel launched in Glasgow at COP26. We should have this immediate moratorium in the southern Amazon. We should have the protection of the indigenous territories. We should bring innovation in conservation policy, and we should have more efficient monitoring systems. We saw the president-elected Lula talking about fighting illegal activities and deforestation, and we must create conservation units, and we must do the new demarcation of indigenous lands. How to work with the local governance? We have to engage the local communities. It's not a solution from the outside. It must come from within. We must engage all the communities, indigenous communities, urban communities as well. We should restore the forest. And José is going to speak about the importance of restoring the policy. And we have also very efficient policies to improve what we call the new bioeconomy with investments that we need to save the Amazon. Investment in all the Amazon countries to create this new bioeconomy with healthy standing forests and flowing rivers. Next one. This is the idea. We should have an integrative collaboration with this conservation plan that should impact the entire Amazon region, not only in Brazil. And to save the Amazon, we must create this plan. I won't delve into details on how to create this new economy, on how to value all the ecosystem services. We talk about carbon, but the forest is recycling water, and we have the flying rivers, and all, many of the much of the rainfall depends on the flowing rivers, with a great amount of value to power generation, for agriculture. This is a great challenge, and we must put together this global plan to overcome this challenge and not to risk losing the forest. Next one. I'd like to wrap up by saying that this is one of the most urgent things, as we must have the Paris Agreement that reducing the greenhouse gases until 2030. This is the greatest challenge of the tropical forest. This urgent need to call for global, national, subnational, and local actions to save the Amazon forest. This is the main sentence. This is the Amazon we want. Let's save the Amazon and the Amazon populations. Thank you so much. I'm very honored and I get very emotional to have in Brazil a science and a scientist with the quality of Professor Carlos Nobre. Not by chance, Professor Carlos belongs to the main science academies in the world, the American Academy, the World Academy. And he was awarded with the main awards concerning this topic. And I'm sure that these awards will keep coming because somehow this is the world recognizing the importance of this science, which has enabled somehow not only the scientific knowledge, but also the welfare of people who are living in these environments, and the welfare and the well-being of the planet due to the environment. So I believe that all these awards and recognitions in reality are signs of how much this contribution is relevant. And I'd like to give the floor to Anne Alencar. She's representing a different dimension of science, that is the science produced in civil society, the Brazilian civil society, especially IPAM, where Anne works for some time. It's one of the organizations that has been recognized as a great contributor for the science of forests, the science of the planetary systems, always reminding the relationship with the peoples living in these territories. Anne is a Brazilian geographer with a master's degree in remote sensing and GIS from Boston University and PhD in forest resources and conservation at the University of Florida. And she's been contributing hugely representing the civil society in this important wave that is the relationship of science with everything else we're talking about here. Thank you, Roberto. It's a great pleasure to be here. I am representing a group of researchers in reality led by Paulo Moutino, my colleague at IPAM, who studied deeply the SPA report, the Science Panel for the Amazon report that we launched last year to summarize the impact and the opportunities that the Amazon, the indigenous Amazon has in this new era that we are living right now. So we want to reinforce that because you're going to see that the indigenous peoples, I'm sorry, Jose, that uh, you're behind me, but not only the indigenous peoples, but the traditional communities living in the Amazon with their territories or not, demarcated or not, they have a solution for the climate changes. How does that work? Okay. So for us to talk about indigenous peoples, we have to have a dimension of their territory. We're talking about 2.2 million people divided in more than 410 groups, different ethnicities, with this huge diversity in languages, 300 ones, and with at least 6,000 indigenous territories. Many of them are in lands that were not delimited, they are isolated. So this is a vision of the official data, but they hold more than 170 million hectares of forested area, one-fourth of the forest in the Amazon. So they are the guardians of at least one-fourth of the standing Amazon. That's why it's super important to talk about rights. I am speaking as an Amazon scientist, not as an indigenous person, but with no right to land. The indigenous individuals cannot contribute for the discussion on climate. And they suffer the threats of the climate change with extreme events. So we have some figures which are very impressive. In this 27% of coverage, of forest coverage in the Amazon, 10 to 20% of all the carbon stock lies. And if emitted, it would be 2.5 years of global GHG emissions. And they are key to act as a barrier for deforestation. Today, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Brazilian Amazon, which I know better, the main driver today of deforestation is called land speculation. So once more, it's key that the indigenous peoples and the original communities, traditional communities, have their land demarcated. But because that will remove the land from the market. Because in fact, they are acting as a barrier for deforestation and for the forest degradation. And that has impacts on fires, forest fires. The indigenous people know how to handle fire. It's impressive. They know how to use fire. And nowadays, they've been victims of climate somehow and victims of what's happening and the neighboring territories, because the fire is invading the indigenous land, especially in Xingu and in the north of the Amazon. When we observe the Amazon landscape and we see great blocks of forests, such as this one that is an island of forest within the state of Mato Grosso, we see their role of keeping this integrity, providing ecosystem services which are very important even for agriculture. There are studies showing that around $1 billion are being impacted or could be impacted if these territories are deforested. Besides, they also work as climate regulations. You may see that this deforested area is going to be warmer than this forest area. And depending on how it's distributed on the land, the impact on local climate might be even higher. These territories are endangered by illegal mining, by fires, by invasions, by illegal logging. I want to show you this data that is very impressive concerning the map biomes of mining, showing that in this indigenous land, we had a growth in terms of mining, and you're able to see that there was this expressive increase from 2010 to 2020, almost a 500% increase of mining in indigenous lands, especially in the last 4 years, and we may wonder why. And everything is connected to the climate, with an impact on the traditional communities and indigenous peoples living in the Amazon. So these forests, which are accumulating in the national inventory of emissions, they are accumulating carbon, but a part of them is responsible for emissions because the fire is impacting these areas. So within the indigenous land, we have almost 12% of the forest being burned in the last 30 years. And Joss, who studies forest fires, he's been studying for a long time and its effect in the biomass, can confirm that once the forest is burned, this Amazon forest is burned, it's losing at least 25% of its biomass, and it takes time to be recovered. So it's very serious. Next slide, please. And here you may see this data, which is very interesting concerning Woodall Climate Research Center, showing that how much these territories are going to be impacted in a warmer climate. So in fact, those helping to mitigate climate change are going to be the most impacted. It's critical to recognize the indigenous land. We have to provide technical and financial support to implement these territories, for the management of these territories, to conserve these territories. The indigenous peoples are important voices for climate change. They are here in a great number. And it's key that in this discussion of losses and damages, they are included. So that's it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Obrigado, Anne. A
Thank
gente vai,
you. We are going to listen now to Jose Barlow. Jose is British and he is the main researcher at the NESC-FAPESP consortium. He is a researcher at the Sustainable Amazonia Network. He is an author of over 60 policy papers. He is the executive director of the Journal of Applied Ecology. He is the professor of the University of Lancaster and the Federal University of Pará. He is going to bring a very interesting topic that represents the substitution of the deforestation arch by the reforestation arch. This is what we are calling the bio age, the relationships with nature that we are seeing in the planet as a whole. So Jos, your turn. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And I would also like to thank many people and lots of collaboration. This is the result of 20 years of collaboration, especially in Pará. Carlos already mentioned with a lot of detail the importance of creating a change in the Amazon's trajectory. The current trajectory is bringing a lot of severe risks in Amazon. The Amazon is fragile in the current climate change. There are a lot of scientific papers that show that restoration can bring solutions to these problems. It could help in keeping the climate favorable. It could avoid fires. It could help the people. Of course, restoration could be a possibility, but the great question that everybody wants to know is where could restoration could be carried out? How can we avoid the forests from Brazil to look like this? There is a more favorable status that we could get to. So what I'm going to sell to you now is the portrait of our policy brief. Don't worry, you don't have to understand this now. You're going to understand this in a while. I'm going to break this framework down in a lot of different pieces. If we want to restore, we're going to talk about different little pieces. We cannot restore if we have deforestation happening in large scale. We are going to avoid 4 million hectares of primary forests to be deforested. If we avoid forest degradation, there are 100 million hectares of degraded forests to be recovered. I think the next solution that we have in a policy briefing is restoring the public forests. First, because we have more guarantees that they are going to remain. And second, because there are areas that could be used to be restored. There's another advantage, that there are chances to have restoration, passive restoration, without having to plant trees. And the next step is going to be restoration in private lands. For example, the study shows that only in the municipality of Paragominas, there are 500 kilometers on riversides that required restoration. And our study showed that there are 5 million hectares of cleared riparian zones that do not require laws, that do not require legislation. Sustainable restoration of degraded farmland could be applied to over 24 million hectares of degraded pastures in the Brazilian Amazon. Those areas are very important. If we applied those 7 goals here, there could be several benefits among them. If we restore, for example, pastures, we can avoid forest degradation. We can avoid risks of fires. That's where we want to get to, but how can we get there? There are several leverages that we can apply. For example, strengthen public policies, support governance, empower the local people. In the policy briefing, we detail each one of them. For example, 3 policies are important here. The state plan of Pará, including 5 million hectares as a goal. If we change the forest code laws for compensation alone, that can incentivize restoration in private areas. This doesn't happen today because they can purchase areas, very distant areas, for example. In Brazil, the meal programs are incentivizing the purchases of food produced locally. These policies have a lot of links among them. Monitoring, for example, is very important for the rest of them. Land policies are very important for the rest of them as well, so the leverages are all connected. Another tip in the policy brief is that restoration has to be carried out at the landscape level. I'm going to give you 2 examples here. This is the map of fragmentation, and that is the same map of fragmentation if you consider secondary forests. So the secondary forests that exist today have a very important role, and restoration could help even further with that. And you have to think where, according to the landscapes, you are going to place those forests. There are a lot of synergies, a lot of benefits, because you're going to avoid buffering edge effects. So there are a lot of benefits of proximity. And to conclude, we need large-scale forest restoration to help building an alternative future for the Amazon. This is an important piece of the puzzle, but restoration is much, much more than just planting trees. It requires a suite of actions that include avoiding deforestation, tackling degradation, and enhancing the sustainability of farming as well. And finally, if this happens at a large scale, this needs to go way beyond just planting trees. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jos.
Então agora a gente vai ouvir a Belém Paz
Now we're going to listen to Belén Paz from Ecuador. She's an ecologist with a master's from the International University of Andalusia. She is the president and coordinator of Foundation Pachamama. She's also a secretary of Amazon Sacred Hindu Headwaters Initiative, which aims to protect 35 million hectares on the border between Ecuador and Peru in collaboration with Amazonian Indigenous federations. A pleasure to hear from you, Belén.
Para concluir este panel, lo que yo quisiera comentar es que la alianza entre la academia, el sector académico, el panel científico amazónico, los pueblos indígenas en Perú, en Ecuador y las pequeñas ONGs son una alianza muy importante para dar respuestas al tipping point que enfrenta la Amazonía. Este es un modelo que nos permite conocer datos científicos para poder fortalecer nuestros proyectos de implementación en la Amazonía. Quiero contarles que definitivamente ha llegado el tiempo en que la bioeconomía se convierte en un superpoder. Es una respuesta evidente frente a esta destrucción que enfrentamos. Y la bioeconomía nos está dando datos muy alentadores en los últimos 5 años porque está reduciendo la deforestación, está fomentando la restauración de territorios degradados, está definitivamente reduciendo los índices de ilegalidad en deforestación y en ampliación de fronteras industriales y principalmente está motivando a la gente local, a las comunidades indígenas a fortalecer sus capacidades para poner en marcha un gran programa en los próximos 10 años que puede convertirse en un modelo económico para la transición ecológica en la Amazonía. Ha llegado el tiempo de la bioeconomía y con esto muchas posibilidades. Siguiente. La bioeconomía nos ayuda a tener nuevos parámetros e indicadores que nos permiten saber que en los próximos 10 años la mitad de la población en la Amazonía, tal vez 1 millón de personas en la Amazonía podrán estar vinculados a cadenas de valor. Y tenemos buenas noticias. Por ejemplo, en Colombia, el gobierno de Colombia espera que en los próximos 10 años, al menos 2.5 millones de nuevos trabajos puedan abrirse y el Producto Interno Bruto de Colombia pueda tener al menos 10% de ingresos a través de la bioeconomía. En Perú, a menos de un año, se ha incrementado más de 30 millones de dólares para la implementación de proyectos con cadenas de valor nuevos en la Amazonía del Perú. El gobierno del Ecuador esta semana ha anunciado el diseño y el lanzamiento de un sello cero deforestación con más de 120 productos de bioeconomía para ser exportados a la región y también a Europa y a los Estados Unidos. En Ecuador, un ejemplo muy específico, el 99% de la deforestación se transfiere a un sistema de sistemas degradados y el Ecuador pretende en los próximos años convertir todo esto en cero deforestación a través de proyectos no monocultivos, pero proyectos de bioeconomía. Podemos evidenciar que necesitamos generar capacidades con pueblos indígenas, especialmente con jóvenes, con laboratorios en territorios que puedan ser manejados para procesos de bioeconomía con aceites esenciales, con cosméticos, con la vainilla, por ejemplo, que se ha convertido en uno de los más grandes productos del Ecuador y del Perú. 1 kilo de vainilla en este momento bien fermentado vale más de $4,000. La próxima. Sí, los balances nos dicen que los últimos 5 años la cadena valor del morete, los frutos de palma, de vainilla, han subido de una manera duplicada frente a los últimos 5 años y tenemos que 1 kilo de vainilla está costando más de $500 y esto significa que una familia podría sobrevivir dentro del bosque sin deforestar con este tipo de productos. Entonces, como les dije al principio, gracias al panel científico hemos logrado afinar nuestras estrategias de trabajo y ahora tenemos que hacer investigación para que estos productos puedan ser resilientes frente a los cambios del clima y de la deforestación. Gracias.
Muito bom. Uma das questões mais importantes, né, quando a gente fala de Amazônia,
This is one of the most important issues when we talk about the Amazon, is the integration between the Amazon countries and the growing demand in the tropical countries. I think we're seeing this increase in the scientific panel of the Amazon and the change to the scientific panels of the Amazon. I would like to invite now Mauro de Almeida. He is the environmental secretary of the state of Pará. He is a federal lawyer and a master in law at the University of Pará. He has been a great partner of this whole development. It's very important that besides this connection with the civil society, we maintain this connection with the governments. And this event in this hub represents the importance of this collective effort, this articulate effort that we have. Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation. I would like to thank Emma. I had the opportunity of taking part last COP in the launch of the report, Amazon We Want. I would like to greet my dear friend, Alencar, who is a reference now, not only in the scientific world, but a reference in activism. I'm happy to know that Professor Yos is a professor at the Federal University of Pará. I have some colleagues here like Joyce Ferreira, Professor Chiquito. I think it's him. We always call him Professor Chiquito. I think Professor Francisco Costa is Professor Chiquito. I think we are among familiar friends here, among partners. And these studies serve as a reference to us, serve as a basis for us to transform them into public policies. I really like the approach of Professor Joss. He's already bringing to reality what needs to be done in terms of policy changes and legislation changes. I am a federal lawyer and I was a consultant to the environmental department. I know how it is to put this on the ground and how to bring this to the practical plane. I was asked a question yesterday at a panel at COP Innovation Action at a different hub at the Lamborghini Hotel. And they asked me, what do we need to make things better? I answered, first, pay attention to the positive initiatives that are happening. There are initiatives happening at the state of Pará. The state of Pará decided in the last 3 years to prepare to the future. There is a legal framework prepared and under preparation in the state of Pará to receive the support of the partnerships. The state of Pará is prepared to receive these studies as a basis for public policies. We have used at least 2 studies from the 2030 Amazon platform to prepare them, to turn them into public policies. We use the Map Biomas tool as a monitoring tool for our plan. We use the training by Norway for the monitoring of our deforestation, but there's something we need to observe.
Seja de crédito de carbono,
We must observe the Brazilian norms either on carbon credits and or the general law of licensing or this change in the forest code. And I see our representative Molon, which I hope that will have a good representation in the future as well. I've been Alessandro Molon, and I've been a public servant for many decades, and we are not considered environmentalists, but we must work, even if we are environmentalists, in this diverse reality of different pressures from political groups, and we are able to advance where it's possible. And us as environmentalists, we're proposing this idea of sustainable development with this idea of including bioeconomy or economy or transformative element. The economy brought us to this point of environmental degradation, but it should be the element for the solution of this degradation. We don't have enough personnel in the National Congress to put forward our ideas and host them the best way possible. So the challenge is to have this dialogue with the National Congress and other branches as well. So this is a government view, and after 4 years of the term of our Governor Helder, with this new leadership, propositional leadership, a conciliative leadership, but we know the reality we face and the challenge we have ahead. So what's important at this moment is that each one of these members, the panel members representing international entities and people who are referenced, such as Professor Nobre, Professor Annie, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Professor Emma, they should, the individuals who are fostering the dialogue after this pandemic and after this electoral moment that we just lived. So we are ready to receive and to dialogue with the scientific partners who are presented here. Thank you so much.
então a gente vai agora abrir para
Now we are going to open for this brief Q&A session. Isabella is going to coordinate that. Brothers and sisters, we haven't seen any discussions about development models. We cannot advance without the participation of the indigenous peoples. That's why we are here with our traditional knowledge, ancestral wisdom, with our colleagues, Carlos, Annie, and we are here to support you. We are here to give our contributions, and we want to be heard with our solutions that walk hand in hand with science and with this economy that we respect the voices and in the nature. That's why we're here. I came to the event with the daughter, with Chico Mendes' daughter. And for us to survive, us indigenous peoples, we have to survive. Our house, our food, and our water comes from the forest. That's why the scientific panel is making this effort to incorporate the indigenous knowledge And we are part of this work because we are the key part of the solution that must be established now with this different science. That's why, brothers and sisters, that we have new exchanges in Latin America. The president of Colombia has created this initiative to save the woods. And now Brazil is saying that it's going to respect the rights of the nature. And this is hope for us. If you don't see life in the food and the nature, in the water, we won't have food for us and we won't have food for the humanity. So let's move on together, always working with good ideas and good initiatives to save the Amazon. And now we have a scientific panel that is taking care of everyone. We should have governments that are willing to walk hand in hand with the indigenous peoples, and any initiative should focus on the nature and the indigenous population. Thank you. Thank you. My name is Adalberto. Wow, I'm a researcher from IMPA, the National Institute of Research on the Amazon. And I work with the environment adaptations in the Amazon, and I've been working with that for the last 40 years. And the implication of the forest studies are many. Some we've seen here. The traditional knowledge of the original peoples is not in contrast with the contemporary knowledge. It's complementary to that. And it's key that we have this understanding. One of the great problems of the destruction of forests and also the generation of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the warming. 90% of the human food is coming from the fish. The Amazon fish are living close to their thermal limits, 1 degree from the threshold for many species. So, my dear Carlos, the tipping point, and my dear Annie, the tipping point is also in the water for the fish. And this is very serious because it's affecting the food security. But here, we also need to think about solutions. And it's the job of science to do so. It's the job of science to find alternatives with this additional knowledge. And that's why we are proposing to use all the knowledge we have on the Amazon to produce new technologies that may help preventing the tipping point. And the Institute of Technology for the Amazon is proposing one of the way outs for that. We must be together. The Amazon is not Brazilian, it's not Colombian, but it's a unique biome, and we must be together to prevent its destruction. Someone else would like to speak? My name is Cândido Pastor. I'm from Bolivia, and I work in several countries in the Amazon. I'd like to congratulate you because you developed an exceptional document. We've been using that to justify our proposals, and we use that in our daily lives as a source of information, a very rich source of information. So, Carlos, you showed how to prevent the tipping point and the measures is the restoration of the indigenous economy, and nobody could be against that. And my question is, what is the financial cost of that? We've been talking about direct access to indigenous people, but there's nothing, there's not much happening. And also not much about calculating the costs to develop this indigenous economy and scale. And my question is if there's a financial model or more than one that are planning to do so.
Pode dar.
I think we can. Is there any other question or comment? Good morning. My name is Sylvia Rooks. I am the resident coordinator of the UN in Brazil, and I am the representative of the General Secretary. I'd like to congratulate you on the information that we have received. Very interesting documents and information. And a very important message that you've conveyed is the need to work together. I have a responsibility to bring the United Nations to this agenda. We have 25 agendas and programs that must work together. This is my responsibility. But we also have to invite the civil society and the private sector and the federal and subnational governments. And for that, the proposal of the UN system is to have this mechanism. We've been working in the last 2 years with the consortium, the Legal Amazon Consortium, for this mechanism for financial programming that we are going to sign at 4 p.m. today. Of course, I'd like to have your participation to monitor that and also to make it available to everyone. It's not a mechanism just for conversation and analysis. But we also have a huge problem that was approved by the General Secretary, and this is the second one that is that the United Nations will have in Latin America and Caribbean, but we have to work as a region because it's the Amazon for Brazil, but the Amazon is also encompassing Peru, Guyana, Ecuador, other territories. So we should help coordinating this region with all different institutions and now with also with the new governments. We would like to support you. Of course, that we want offer this added substantive added value if we have different proposals for each country. So thank you so much. I think that we have 2 more questions, right? Good afternoon. My name is Avesita Chikchon. I represent the Moore Foundation. It's a great pleasure to be able to support since the beginning this initiative. I'd like to congratulate all of you in this panel. Honestly, it's a great success to have people from different countries working together with this vision from the Amazon connected as a single zone. This is a great success. And I'd like to ask you concerning the SPA in this next phase, how are you incorporating the young scientists and the young people that could be part of that in the long term? So I'd like to know what are your ideas and initiatives on that. Thank you. We're going to take another question and then we're going to have a round for answers, okay? Thank you so much. Very quickly, my name is Pascal Martinez. I'm the leader of the Amazon Give program that is going to be huge. And I'd like to comment on what was said because we are working together in this program. We have this great platform to to study the region, and we are going to have an event tomorrow. If you are interested, you're welcome. Thank you. Before I give the floor to Professor Carlos, I'd like to listen from the panel members in this order, and then we have the closure with Professor Carlos, okay? I'm gonna make this general comment. I coordinated in SPA one of the chapters on what we think about the future of the Amazon, the SPA vision for the Amazon. And it was a hard mission because we have different visions. Within the scientific communities, we have several visions. And there's something very relevant, and I don't have the answer for that, is how to work with this perspective of thinking about a model for the Amazon that could invest in the diversification and potential of the Amazon, of being a diversified system. How to work with that? Everything we think about that, the model that we are establishing in the Amazon for changing the use of land, which is one of the great drivers with the global climate change. And we are advancing towards single cultures. We have a great deal of land being occupied by pastures. So how to bring diversity to the Amazon in every sense? So this is the main question. One of the things we've been doing for the panel, and we weren't able to do so, was to raise all the different initiatives, interesting initiatives on sustainability in the Amazon. How many projects the PPG7 has funded? How many lessons learned and initiatives that are fabulous? Where are they? And I'm going to give you another example. Today, we don't know the size of social bioeconomy in the Amazon. So how can we talk about numbers? We don't know because it's an invisible economy. But it's key. We should know. Did you know that in the conservation units in Brazil, there are more than 3,000 institutions working, and that if we organized, we could have this data? So this is the kind of thing we need. Science has been advancing a lot in discovering the thresholds, but we need to provide a response that will strengthen the economies in the Amazon, the economic diversity in the Amazon, the diversity in terms of culture, thinking. So this is the great challenge. We don't have a single recipe. We should have several recipes. Thank you. Excellent, Anne. You said everything. We are only protecting the diversity of the Amazon with a diversity of solutions. This is very true. And we've had a synthesis, which is really an encyclopedia of science. And this year we're doing the synthesis of the synthesis. But the science has a great knowledge. We can improve some things, that's for sure, but we have this evidence base that is very strong to evolve. And the challenge now is 100% in implementation, how to scale up the ideas that are working, how to judge what is working. That's it. In the case of Ecuador and Peru, the financial plan of the Cuencas Sagradas plan for the transition, the ecology transition in the next 10 years has a cost of $19 million. And from this value, at least 10 to 20% could come from the bilateral agencies, and a great percentage could be implemented by the state. So we know that these are structural topics, and it has to do with the conservation, with financial models that are with this extractive transition, with contributions to the carbon market. And we know that these fundings are going to nourish the state. So among the 9 countries, we should analyze to understand the feasibility of these plans. And concerning education, there are several schools that are forming right now, building the capacity of indigenous people and young people from the Amazon. We have IDC and other schools. Each one has its own school for capacity building of young people. And we also have technological institutes where the young indigenous people are designing their own methodologies with knowledge to enhance the bioeconomy processes. So there's a great possibility there, and we would like to collaborate even more. Thank you.
Professor Carlos,
I'll pass the floor to Emma and then to Professor Carlos. I think we have a very relevant element, which is this systemic view of the forest, of the Amazons. We have mentioned a lot the necessary acknowledgement of the heterogeneity of the different Amazons, and at the same time, the acknowledgement of the different Amazons and the need for integrating the efforts. This connection with the youths seems to be one of the main challenges and a huge opportunity to make this connection, not only among the different countries, but among the different Amazons, among the different youths who have a very different worldview than our generation. Emma and then Professor Carlos.
Só para dizer muito obrigado a todos
I would
vocês.
just like to thank all of you. Thank you for the comments. Now I'd like to say that in the future, we will continue with an agenda of expanding the panel to a variety of solutions, and I would like to expand the panel to the youth. The panel advocates to the science and technology for the future, and that means investing in the youth. That is a huge task for the future, and I would like to thank my colleague, the coordinator of the United Nations in Brazil, and we will work in coordination with the work that they do, and our colleagues from GF, they are financing a lot of different investments in the Amazon. Thank you very much to all of you, and thank you especially to our coordinator, our moderator. He has efficiently moderated this meeting. Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much to everyone. That was a very important discussion. Thank you for the comment. Thank you for the suggestions. They will be very useful to the continuation of this panel's work. The panel will continue its job. I would come here forever. We will continue our work. As Emma said, we will bring young scientists, indigenous scientists in a greater number. In the beginning of the panel, we had 7 indigenous scientists as authors. We will focus a lot on the scientists from Amazon, and we will continue evolving very much, creating a connectivity. As the representative of the UN said very well, we have to connect the science with the knowledge of the indigenous peoples and with the local communities to create this new bioeconomy. This is the greatest challenge that we have, with the involvement of all the communities, including the urban communities as well. We will continue together in this direction. And how much does it cost? It does not cost little. We have to bring the investments, the private investments, the public investments, in order to do the restoration, as just said, that is essential to save the Amazon. We're talking about $10 billion, tens of billions of dollars. As Belen said, Colombia and Peru would like to bring 10% of their GDP to this bioeconomy. In the Amazon as a whole, this new economy does not even reach 0.5% of the GDP. This is our greatest challenge. And we, the community of scientists of this panel, our collaborators, we're going to continue with our efforts, with our heart, with our joint efforts now with all the sectors of the Amazonian community, with the indigenous peoples. We're going to find the solution and we're going to save all of our Amazon. Thank you very much. Now I'd like to thank you all. That was an extremely intelligent and extremely rich panel. We're surely going to continue with this dialogue. I'm sure that the science with the civil society and with the governments are going to do what Professor Carlos said, are going to elevate the economy of the Amazon to a level that is connected to what the whole world needs and what is going to be the future of the world economy and what the new models of development of the planet, which will conciliate the social capital, the economic capital, and with the environmental capital, which is extremely different than what we have lived so far. Thank you very much to everyone, and it's a great honor to be here.